How I found Dr. Waldemar Roger. Many will now be able to imagine that this name is a modification of the actual name of a person. From 1919, this person was allowed to use the pseudonyms Dr. Roger, Dr. Waldemar Roger, Dr. F. Waldemar Roger, and continued to do so until the 1930s. How was I able to find this person, who was actually born under a different name? The search goes back to 1996. At that time I visited the Gotha photographer Walter von Erckert. Actually, I was only looking for a special view of the Karolinenplatz in Gotha and hoped to find something in his collection of historical photos. He didn't think so himself, however, and we started talking about old films, especially silent films. The older gentleman was so interested in it because his father George Theodor Walther von Erckert was in a high position in the late 1920s at Phönix-Film AG in Berlin, which had existed there since 1923. This Phoenix-Film AG was in turn connected to Ernst Kiesewetter's Phoenix-Film-Verleih from 1927, which emerged from the old Phoenix-Verleih, 1917, of his father Georg Kiesewetter. Exactly, this Phoenix-Film AG took care of the Spanish and Portuguese dubbing of Dr. Roger's 1930s re-edition of the classic Nosferatu. The father died in Berlin in 1955, while the son Walter was already living in Gotha, then on Stielerstrasse. Walter von Erckert was in turn an acquaintance of the aforementioned Mr. Dobler. This Mr. Dobler became acquainted with Dr. Roger through the Kreuzbund in the 1920s. Initially he saw him as a mentor and later remained his friend for a long time. So there were two people in Gotha who knew him personally very well. Since I was already looking for the ominous Dr. Roger back then, I naturally asked him about the person. Dr. Roger was in contact with old Walter von Erckert for a long time. Also Walter von Erckert Jr. himself could still remember the gentleman, who was already somewhat elderly at the time. However, he did not know an exact last address. All he knew was that he would eventually leave Berlin for good in the direction of his old homeland. A daughter should still live on the Austrian border. That's how I got the real name of Dr. Roger and was able to find a daughter in Bavaria in 1999, who by then was already old again. This told of a half-sister near Poznan. She does not have an exact address and has not been in touch for 30 years. So I put out a wanted ad on the internet, which was still in its infancy at the time. Especially in the Poznan region. It took a while and I got a message from a friend of the half-sister. So, years later, I had finally found a reliable lead. Our forthcoming Nosferatu Chronicle tells who this Dr. Roger really was.